I used to believe Hannah and I had something solid. We first met in college back when things felt easier, and I truly thought we'd grow old side by side. We had two beautiful daughters, a cozy home, and even though our marriage had its bumps, I always thought it was stable. At least, that's what I convinced myself to believe. But looking back now, I see how blind I really was. The warning signs were there, plain as day, but I refused to acknowledge them. Things started shifting about a year ago. Hannah had landed a new job, something she seemed genuinely thrilled about. She'd started working for this big-name politician, Derek. He was one of those guys who practically lived in a suit, oozing charisma and power. I remember her coming home after her first meeting with him, practically glowing. I figured it was just the excitement of a fresh start. In hindsight, I should have known something was off. At first, I didn't pay much attention to her late nights or how she was suddenly glued to her phone. I figured it was just work being hectic. But then, the small things began piling up. She stopped showing any affection, not just physically, but emotionally, too. It felt like she was there in body, but miles away in spirit. The woman I had married was slowly fading, and I couldn't understand why. One evening, after a long day, I asked her how things were going at the office. She brushed me off with a curt "fine," delivered in that tone that made it clear I shouldn't dig any deeper. That word "fine" started haunting me. It became her default answer to everything. But I knew deep down that nothing was fine. Something was definitely wrong, and I could feel it gnawing at me. Our sex life completely vanished. At first, I chalked it up to stress, but soon it became obvious. She wasn't interested, not even in making excuses anymore. Anytime I tried to bring it up, she'd snap at me or accuse me of being paranoid. "Why are you always so suspicious?" she'd say, her voice dripping with irritation. It stung, but I kept pushing those feelings aside, convincing myself it was just a rough patch. Then came a night I couldn't ignore. It was a Friday, and I had come home early, thinking I'd surprise her. The kids were spending the weekend with their grandparents, so I thought maybe we could reconnect. But when I walked into the house, it was dark and Hannah wasn't home. I tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. Hours went by before she finally strolled in around 10 p.m., dressed far too nicely for just another late night at work. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though the frustration was boiling beneath the surface. "Work," she said flatly, not even looking at me. "Work until 10? On a Friday?" My voice gave away the disbelief I was feeling. "Yeah, work doesn't stop at 5, Ryan," she shot back, her eyes daring me to keep questioning her. "Who works that late?" I pressed. "Derek does," she replied, almost smug, like she was throwing it in my face. "Some of us have real jobs, you know." That name, Derek, was becoming a regular in our conversations, and it was eating me alive. I never met the guy, but she spoke about him like he was a godsend. Every other sentence out of her mouth seemed to revolve around him. Derek said this, or Derek thinks that. The way her eyes lit up whenever she mentioned him set off alarm bells. But whenever I tried to pry, she would shut me down or get defensive. "I'm going to bed," she said abruptly, cutting the conversation short. She didn't even wait for a response, just left me standing there, feeling like a fool. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell was happening to us. There was this nagging voice in the back of my mind, but I kept burying it, not ready to face what I already knew deep down. A few weeks later, everything came crashing down. I was working from home when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She had rushed out to work and left it behind. The screen lit up with a message from someone saved as D. My stomach twisted into knots. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but my curiosity got the better of me. I opened the message, and there it was, flirty text, the kind no married woman should be sending to anyone but her husband. My hands shook as I scrolled further, discovering messages that went way beyond innocent flirting. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was real. Hannah was cheating. I sat down, staring at her phone, feeling like the ground had been yanked out from under me. How long had this been going on? Did she even care about us anymore? About our kids? About me? The anger that surged through me was almost unbearable, but I knew I couldn't act on it just yet. I needed time to think, to figure out my next move. That evening, when she came home, I didn't say a word. I acted like everything was fine, but inside, I was seething. I knew I couldn't just confront her. Not yet. I needed hard evidence, something she couldn't deny. I wanted to catch her in the act, to make her realize I wasn't some clueless husband she could fool. So, I waited, and I planned. For the next several days, I couldn't shake the image of those texts from my mind. Every time Hannah walked into the room, I felt my skin crawl. It was like I was living with a stranger, not the woman I thought I knew. I watched her closely, looking for any signs, anything that might confirm the ugly truth I was trying to avoid. She seemed completely unbothered, almost carefree, as if she had no idea I'd discovered her secret. That only made it worse. At night, I'd lay there, barely sleeping, just staring at her, wondering how long she'd been lying to my face. It ate me up inside. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers. How could she do this to me, to our family? But I knew I wasn't ready for that kind of confrontation. Not yet. Instead, I decided I needed more than just a few texts. I needed hard evidence, something she couldn't deny or talk her way out of. So, one evening while she was in the shower, I grabbed her phone again. This time, I dug deeper, sifting through her emails, photos, anything that could give me more insight. My heart raced as I scrolled through weeks, maybe even months, of secret messages between her and Derek. It was worse than I could have imagined. They had been meeting in secret. Hotel rooms, late nights at his office. There were pictures, nothing explicit but enough to make my blood boil. And the messages? They were filled with talk of how she was tired of living in our small, mediocre life, and how Derek offered her more. More of what? More lies? More betrayal? My hands shook as I kept reading, but I couldn't stop. The more I saw, the more I realized this wasn't just some fling. Hannah was planning something much bigger. One message in particular stood out. Soon, we'll have everything we deserve. She had sent it just 2 days ago. I stared at those words, trying to make sense of them. What did they think they deserved? As I pieced together their conversation, it hit me, Hannah wasn't just cheating. She was preparing to leave me. And not just leave, but take the kids, the house, everything we'd built together. Derek was powerful, and from what I gathered, he had the resources to help her make this happen. She was betting on him, believing he could give her a better life, and she was ready to walk out on her family to chase that dream. My heart pounded as the full weight of it sank in. This wasn't just an affair. She was plotting her escape. That's when my anger shifted. It wasn't just a betrayal anymore. It was about revenge. If she thought she could just walk out of my life, take everything I had worked for, and start fresh with him, she was dead wrong. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I stayed up planning my next move. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not without facing the consequences. The following day, I made my first call. I reached out to an old friend of mine, Tom, who worked in IT security. We hadn't spoken in a while, but he still owed me a favor. I told him I needed help setting up surveillance on Hannah's phone. He didn't pry, just gave me the tools I needed, a way to track her movements and record her conversations. I felt dirty, like I was sinking to her level, but I knew I had to protect myself. I couldn't let her blindside me with whatever she was planning. So, over the next few days, I started collecting everything: texts, calls, photos. The more I gathered, the more disgusted I felt, but I knew it was necessary. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place that Friday. Hannah had been acting cagey all week, but that morning, she seemed almost giddy. She left the house earlier than usual, dressed far nicer than her typical work attire. I knew something was going down. So, after she left, I checked the tracking app Tom had set up. It didn't take long to see where she was headed: a hotel downtown. My heart raced as I grabbed my keys and drove out there. I wasn't going to sit at home and wait anymore. I had to see it for myself. When I pulled into the hotel parking lot, her Her car was already there, parked right next to a sleek, black Mercedes. That had to be Derek's. I waited, my heart pounding, palms sweating. I had no idea what I'd do when I saw them, but I wasn't turning back. After about an hour, they emerged, Hannah walking out first, smiling, her arm wrapped around Derek's. They looked like a couple of carefree teenagers sneaking out of class, not two people ripping apart two families. I snapped a couple of photos, my hands trembling as I did. I had the proof, but I wasn't done yet. I followed them. I know it sounds insane, but I wasn't thinking rationally anymore. I just needed to see more, to know how deep this went. They went to some fancy restaurant across town, laughing, whispering to each other like they didn't have a care in the world. Watching them like that, so happy, so casual, made me sick. That's when I knew. This wasn't going to end quietly. No, they were going to feel the full weight of what they had done. But I wasn't going to blow up just yet. I needed the perfect moment, and it was coming soon. By the time the weekend arrived, I had everything I needed to bring their little world crashing down. Hannah, clueless as ever, carried on like nothing was wrong, completely unaware of the storm heading her way. Every fake smile she threw my way, every moment she acted like our life was still intact, filled me with a twisted satisfaction. I knew it wouldn't be long before everything she thought she controlled would slip right through her fingers. But I wasn't ready to drop the hammer just yet. I wanted her to feel secure, like she was still calling the shots. I needed her to believe she was winning this game. So I kept quiet, biding my time, letting her dig herself deeper into the mess she and Derek were so carefully crafting. At this point, it wasn't even about the affair anymore. It was about how far they were willing to go to destroy me. Saturday morning, she woke up early, grinning like she had something big planned. She was dressed in this tight black dress, way too fancy for just a regular workday. She didn't even bother hiding how thrilled she was. "I'm heading out for a little while," she said, sipping her coffee like she didn't have a care in the world. "Derek's got this big corporate event tomorrow night. We're doing some final prep." I just nodded, acting like I wasn't interested. "Need any help with the kids?" She waved me off like it was nothing. "Nah, they're going to my mom's tonight. I'll be tied up all weekend." That was Hannah, always meticulous about making sure her lies were perfectly tied up with a pretty little bow. She thought she had it all under control. "All right," I said, not pushing it any further. I could tell she was in a hurry, constantly glancing at her phone, probably waiting for a text from Derek. Once she was gone, I sat at the kitchen table, staring into my coffee, trying to process what I was about to do. How do we get here? 15 years of marriage, 2 kids, and a life we built together, all coming apart at the seams. But this wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about making sure she didn't walk away without consequences. And neither would he. By Sunday afternoon, everything was set. Hannah had barely been home all weekend, just popping in to grab a few things before rushing off again, always glued to her phone. I didn't need to ask where she was going. I already knew. Still, I played my part, smiling and pretending to be the clueless husband. Funny how I'd been that way for far too long. That evening, when I dropped the kids off at her mom's, I found myself wondering if this was the last time I'd see our family in one piece. I knew that after tonight, nothing would ever be the same. I kissed Emily and Sophie goodbye, telling them I'd pick them up in the morning. They smiled and waved, blissfully unaware of the chaos that was about to unfold. And for that, I was grateful. They didn't need to know, at least not yet. Driving back home, I checked the time. The big event Hannah had been working on all weekend was starting soon. Derek was hosting a grand gala at his company's headquarters, a gathering of the city's elite, politicians and businessmen alike, all there to network and make deals. It was Derek's night to shine, to showcase his influence. And Hannah? She was his right-hand woman, the one making it all happen behind the scenes. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had no idea her perfect little world was about to implode. I arrived late, slipping in with the crowd. The place was packed. Everyone was dressed to impress, champagne glasses in hand, and the usual fake smiles that came with events like this. I spotted Hannah near the entrance, chatting with some board members, her grin as wide and insincere as ever, like she was born for this. And Derek? He was in the center of it all, shaking hands, laughing, controlling the room with ease. The sight of them together made my stomach turn. I hung back, watching and waiting. I wasn't going to confront them just yet. I had a better plan in mind. Making my way through the crowd, I slipped into the control room where the tech team was managing the event's audiovisual setup. It didn't take much convincing to get them to let me check on things. Just a husband looking out for his wife's hard work. They didn't blink an eye when I slipped a USB drive into the system and uploaded the audio I had prepared. A few more minutes, and the entire room would hear what I had in store. As I stood there, hiding in the shadows, I watched Hannah and Derek with their smug, self-satisfied expressions. They thought they had won. They thought they were untouchable. Little did they know I was about to flip the script. Finally, Derek took the stage to give his big speech. The room fell silent as he flashed that famous politician's smile, the one that made everyone hang on his every word. He started talking about the company's success, all the hard work that had gone into the event, glancing at Hannah like she was the star of the show. The crowd was eating it up, completely clueless about the bomb I was about to drop. They had no idea what was coming, but they were about to find out. And then it happened. Right in the middle of Derek's speech, the audio cut out. For a brief moment, there was total silence. People in the room exchanged confused glances, and I watched as Derek's confident expression turned into one of uncertainty. Then, my recording began to play. At first, it was just a casual conversation between Derek and Hannah, one of their many flirtatious exchanges over the phone. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder as people strained to understand what they were hearing. Then it shifted to something far more incriminating. Their affair, their plans, and their conversations about the future they were building together once Hannah left me and took everything I had worked for. The room went completely still. All eyes shifted to Hannah, who stood there, pale as a ghost. Her champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor, but she didn't even flinch. Derek, too, froze, trying and failing to keep his composure. But it was too late. The damage was done. Their betrayal was now out in the open for everyone to witness. Whispers broke out across the room, people exchanging shocked looks, some pulling out their phones to capture the unfolding chaos. Hannah stood frozen, her eyes darting around, desperately looking for an escape, but there was nowhere to run. As for Derek, he was already on the move, muttering something under his breath before storming off the stage, his career disintegrating before his very eyes. I stood there, watching it all unfold, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and something else, something I hadn't expected. Sorrow. I had exposed them, ruined them, but seeing Hannah's life fall apart in front of everyone gave me a pang of something deeper. No matter how much I despised her in that moment, she had still been my wife for so many years. And those years couldn't just be erased. But they were gone now. The room buzzed with a mixture of shock and confusion. Derek had disappeared, leaving Hannah standing there, completely alone in her humiliation. It felt surreal to watch her like that, standing in the center of the storm, her carefully constructed world crashing down around her. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. For the first time since I had known her, Hannah was speechless. I didn't stick around to see the full aftermath. I had seen enough. Quietly, I made my way to the door, slipping out before anyone could notice. The cold air outside hit me like a wave, but it felt like a breath of fresh air after the suffocating tension inside. I leaned against my car for a moment, trying to process everything that had just happened. I had done it. I had exposed them both in front of the very people they had been trying to impress. But instead of triumph, I felt empty. For weeks, I had imagined this moment, how satisfying it would be to watch their lives unravel. And while it was satisfying in some ways, it didn't feel like the victory I had hoped for. Hannah had been my wife once, and we had shared good times, happiness, even love. But now all that was left was the bitter aftertaste of betrayal. I climbed into my car and just sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel, wondering what came next. The girls were still at Hannah's mom's place, and while I didn't want to bring them into this just yet, I knew the time was coming. They'd have to know eventually. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. There was still one more thing I had to do before this was over. I dialed Tom, my IT buddy who had helped me set up all the surveillance. "It's done," I said the moment he answered. "Everything go according to plan?" he asked. "Yeah," I replied, rubbing my temples. "Better than I expected. Actually," he let out a low whistle. "So, what now?" I hesitated. "I need the footage from Hannah's phone, the rest of it. Can you send it to me?" "Yeah, no problem," Tom said, his tone more serious now. "I'll email it within the hour. You sure you want to go through with this, Ryan?" There was a slight pause before I answered. "Yeah, I'm sure." I hung up and drove home, my mind racing. The footage I was waiting for wasn't just about their affair. No, there was something much bigger. Over the past few weeks, as I dug deeper, I uncovered that Derek wasn't just fooling around with Hannah. He was involved in some shady, high-level business dealings. Money laundering, tax evasion, political favors. It was all there, buried in their private conversations. At first, I hadn't planned to use that information. But now it seemed like the perfect final nail in the coffin. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for Tom's email. The house felt emptier than usual, like a hollow shell of the life Hannah and I had once built. I glanced at the photos on the wall, vacations, family moments, smiles. It was hard to believe any of it had ever been real. I wondered just how long she had been faking it. A notification chimed, and I opened the email from Tom. There they were, hours of recorded conversations between Hannah and Derek. I quickly skimmed through, looking for what I needed. It didn't take long to find the smoking gun. Conversations about bribes, shady deals, favors exchanged behind closed doors. This wasn't just an affair anymore. It was corruption at the highest level, and I knew exactly what to do with it. The next morning, I made a call to a contact I had at the local news outlet. We had gone to high school together, and while we weren't exactly friends, I knew he'd be very interested in this kind of story. This wasn't just going to ruin Derek's career. It was going to burn down his entire political empire. Within hours, I was sitting across from him at a small cafe downtown, sliding a USB drive across the table. "What's this?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Let's just say it's a career-ending scoop," I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. "For a politician who's been playing dirty for far too long." At first, he looked skeptical, but as soon as he plugged the drive into his laptop and started listening to the recordings, his eyes widened. "Holy, this is massive." "I know," I said, leaning back in my chair, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. "And it's all yours." He was quiet for a minute, scrolling through the files, absorbing the magnitude of what he was seeing. "Why are you giving this to me?" I kept my answer vague. "Let's just say I've got personal reasons. Derek's been screwing with people's lives for a while, including mine. It's time someone put a stop to it." He nodded, slowly piecing it together. "I'll need to verify this, but if it checks out, this will be front-page news. You know this will completely end him, right?" "That's the whole point," I said as I stood up. "I trust you'll handle it properly." Without looking back, I left the cafe, feeling a strange sense of relief. It was out of my hands now. By the end of the week, the story would be everywhere, and Derek's carefully constructed life would come crumbling down. His influence, his money, his connections, it would all vanish. And Hannah? She'd go down with him. The press would inevitably uncover her involvement. And even if she didn't face legal consequences, her reputation would be shattered. Everything she'd schemed for gone. Later that evening, I picked up the girls from Hannah's mom's house. Emily and Sophie were sleepy, confused when I told them they were coming home with me. They asked why their mom wasn't picking them up, and I did my best to give vague answers, avoiding the full truth. I wasn't ready to explain everything to them just yet. All I told them was that plans had changed, and they'd be staying with me for a while. As I tucked them into bed that night, I sat on the edge of Emily's bed for a while, watching her drift off to sleep. My mind raced, thinking about what was coming. By tomorrow morning, the entire city would know what kind of man Derek really was, and what kind of woman Hannah had become. Everything about our marriage, our life together, would be out in the open for the world to see. For the first time since all of this started, I felt an unexpected sense of calm. I was finally free. The next morning, I woke up early, the weight of what was about to unfold pressing down on me. I brewed myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. The story was already live, right there on the front page of every news outlet in town. Politician Derek Ellison exposed in shocking scandal. I skimmed through the article, though I already knew the contents by heart. Derek's career was obliterated. The recordings, financial documents, and every dirty deal he had been involved in were laid bare for everyone to see. This wasn't just about the affair with Hannah anymore. It was about the corruption, the bribery, the backdoor deals that had propped up his image for years. Quotes from political figures, legal experts, even his closest colleagues were in the article, each one distancing themselves from him, now that he had become toxic. I checked my phone. No messages from Hannah, no missed calls. But I knew it was only a matter of time before she reached out. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed. It was her. I hesitated for a moment, staring at her name on the screen, knowing that this was the moment I had been waiting for. I imagined what I would say when she finally called, desperate and broken. But as I picked up the phone, I realized the anger that had driven me for so long wasn't there anymore. All I felt was emptiness. Ryan, her voice was shaky, like she'd been crying. Please, can we talk? I didn't respond right away. I had imagined this moment for weeks, picturing the satisfaction I'd feel when she finally reached out, but now all I felt was a void. Talk about what, Hannah? I said quietly, my voice steady. You've already said everything. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, struggling to hold back tears. I didn't know it would go this far, she whispered. I didn't what? I cut her off, my voice hardening. Didn't know that screwing your boss and helping him destroy people's lives might have consequences? Or didn't care? Ryan, please, she choked out. I never meant for it to turn out like this. I was confused. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. We can still fix us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even after everything, she still thought there was something left to salvage. After all the lies, the betrayal, the destruction. I let out a bitter laugh. Fix us? I shook my head, unable to comprehend her delusion. Hannah, there is no us anymore. You destroyed that a long time ago. On the other end of the line, I could hear her start to sob. I wanted to feel something, maybe anger, satisfaction, even pity, but I didn't. I felt nothing. I was done. There was no going back, and I had made my peace with that. What do you want me to say? I asked, my voice softer now, but still cold. That I forgive you? That it's all going to be okay? It's not. You know that. Her sobs faded into silence, and I could hear her trying to pull herself together. But she had nothing left to say. I'm sorry, she whispered, barely audible. For everything. I know I've ruined us. I know it's all my fault. But the girls... Ryan, please, I need to see them. Initially, I had no intention of keeping the kids from her. Despite the fury boiling inside me, I wasn't going to rob her of being their mother. But this wasn't just about infidelity anymore. Her involvement in Derek's shady dealings, his corruption, wasn't something I could ignore. I had to keep the girls safe, whatever the cost. They'll see you, I said, after a long pause. But not right now. They don't know anything, Hannah. I'm not dragging them into this mess yet. I'll tell them when it's the right time. When? She asked, her voice shaky, like she was grasping for any hope. When the dust settles, I said firmly. And only if you keep all of this far away from them. A long, hollow silence followed before she spoke again, her voice now small and defeated. Okay. I hung up, feeling a strange finality settle in. This was it. The end. The rest of the day crawled by. I spent it with the girls, trying to act as if nothing was wrong. We played board games, watched movies, and I tried for a few hours to forget the chaos swirling around us. But every time I looked at their faces, the weight of what I had to tell them pressed harder on my chest. They had to know the truth, but how could I break it to them? How you tell your kids their family is about to shatter? After dinner that evening, I finally sat them down. Emily, the older one, could sense something was off immediately. She looked at me with those wide, innocent eyes, already dreading whatever I had to say. "Dad, is something wrong?" she asked softly. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yes, sweetie. There's something we need to talk about." Sophie, my youngest, sat quietly next to her sister, playing with her hands, eyes darting between us. There was no easy way to say it, so I just came out with the truth. I told them their mom and I wouldn't be together anymore. That things had happened between us that couldn't be fixed. I didn't burden them with details about the affair or the scandal. I couldn't. All I said was that we had grown apart, and none of this was their fault. Emily's lip quivered as tears welled up in her eyes. "Did we do something wrong, Dad? Is it because of us?" My heart shattered in that moment. "No, baby, not at all. You and Sophie did nothing wrong. This is between your mom and me. We both love you so much. None of that will ever change." Sophie started crying too, her small frame trembling as she pressed against me. I pulled them both close, holding them as they sobbed. I felt like I had failed them, like the worst father in the world for putting them through this. But I knew it had to be done. They deserved to know, and it was better they heard it from me. Eventually, their sobs quieted, and they fell asleep beside me, clutching my shirt. I sat there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the full weight of what had just happened. Our family was broken, and no amount of pretending could put it back together again. The next morning, I went to file for divorce. The process was grueling, slow, and painful. Hannah tried to fight it at first, begging me to reconsider. But as the media frenzy surrounding Derek's scandal exploded, she became more distant. The last time we spoke face-to-face, she looked nothing like the woman I had once known. Whatever dreams she'd had about starting a new life with Derek had crumbled. He was facing criminal charges, his career in shambles, and Hannah had been dragged down with him. A few months later, the divorce was finalized. I was granted full custody of the girls, and Hannah moved out. She still saw them on weekends, but the bond between her and the kids was strained. They didn't fully understand what had happened, but they knew things were different. As hard as I tried to protect them from the ugliest parts of it all, they felt the cracks. In me, I slowly began to move on. The anger and betrayal stuck with me for a long time, gnawing at me from the inside. But eventually, I learned to live with it. My focus shifted to the girls, on rebuilding our lives, and creating something new out of the wreckage. Derek disappeared after the scandal broke. The last I heard, he had fled the country to escape prosecution. Hannah tried to pick up the pieces of her life, but it was never the same. She lost her job, her reputation, and the future she had gambled everything on. All that was left for her was the ruins of what she had chosen. As for me, I finally found peace in the aftermath of it all. The storm had passed, and though the damage would always be there, I knew we would be okay.